Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into A Course in Miracles. Today we're going to be looking at Lesson 62, and picking up from where we left off in Lesson 61 with our last deep dive. That whole idea about our brothers actually being extensions of ourselves.
Yeah. It's interesting what Lesson 62 does with this whole idea of forgiveness. It's not just saying, like, oh, let's just pardon them and move on or pretend what they did was okay. It's really presenting something way deeper, like a real shift in perception
hmm
that brings us closer to seeing that light in ourselves and also, like, recognizing it in everyone else, too.
Yeah, for a lot of people, like I think myself included, we kind of struggle with that idea that forgiveness means letting the other person win, or that their actions didn't matter or something. But the Course seems to be saying something totally different here, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A Course in Miracles really challenges us to see forgiveness as our core purpose. Like, it's our job to forgive. And think of it this way. When we're holding on to like resentment and anger and guilt, it's like we're holding on to this burning hot coal. We might think we're punishing the other person by holding on, but actually we're the ones who are getting burned.
Oh man. That makes so much sense.
Like it?
So it's not even about them. It's about us letting go of those feelings,
Yeah.
choosing to see things in a new way,
Yeah.
that everyone makes mistakes, and just holding on to anger really just hurts us in the end.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of forgiveness being our function as the light of the world comes in. So imagine like our inner light is this lamp, but we've got all these layers of judgment and negativity and resentment all covering it up. And so each time we forgive, it's like peeling away a layer, letting more of that light shine through.
I love that analogy. So it's not about dimming someone else's light, right? It's more about
Mm.
reclaiming our own by choosing to look past those illusions. And then we can really recognize that spark that's within us and within everyone
Yeah.
else.
Exactly. And the more we practice forgiveness, that light starts to shine not only in our own lives, but also in the world around us. But let's talk about how this works practically for a second. How does this play out in our relationships?
Okay, so let's say like you have a misunderstanding with a friend that leads to, some hurt feelings. How would forgiveness actually work in a situation like that?
Well, it's important to remember that forgiveness isn't saying that what happened was okay or that it didn't happen. It's about choosing compassion and understanding. Like your friend, everyone's human. Everyone makes mistakes.
So it's about choosing to see the situation and your friend with more compassion and understanding rather than getting stuck in that blame and resentment.
Yeah, exactly. And just that shift in how you're seeing things can be so powerful in healing those wounds and allowing both of you to learn and grow from what happened. But there's another layer to this idea of forgiveness. And this is where things get really interesting.
I have a feeling you're going to say self-forgiveness, which I think for a lot of us is like the hardest kind of forgiveness.
You're right. The Course acknowledges that forgiving ourselves can be the most difficult thing. We tend to be so hard on ourselves. We just hold on to those past mistakes and keep replaying them over and over again in our minds. And it just fuels those feelings of guilt and shame.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I could get a gold medal in mental gymnastics
Yeah.
with how much I beat myself up over past stuff. You
Yes.
know, things I've said or done. But so is Course in Miracles offering like a different perspective on those mistakes.
Absolutely. Lesson 62 encourages us to look at those slip ups as, opportunities to learn and grow instead of those sources of shame and guilt. It invites us to, like, offer that same compassion and understanding that we would to anyone else, but offer it to ourselves.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how all of this fits together. So like if forgiveness is about releasing ourselves from that, burden of judgment,
Mm.
then self-forgiveness is basically just releasing ourselves from judging,
Yeah.
ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, We're always like evolving and learning as we go. And that includes, the freedom to make mistakes without then getting trapped in that cycle of beating ourselves up over it.
So how do we actually do that? How do we put this into practice? It can't be as easy as just deciding to forgive ourselves and then poof, all those negative feelings are gone. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a practice, not a one-time fix. But the good news is that Lesson 62 gives us some actual concrete exercises
Mm.
to help us cultivate forgiveness of both others and ourselves.
Okay, awesome. So let's get into those. What are some practical steps that we can take to start incorporating forgiveness into our lives like every day?
Well, one of the practices the Course suggests is daily reflection. So, like taking just a few minutes every day to consciously choose forgiveness. So, you might think about someone who you feel has wronged you, or even yourself,
Yeah.
and you just simply offer them forgiveness in your mind.
So it's almost like a mental rehearsal for forgiveness, creating a
Yeah.
space where you can practice letting go of those negative emotions.
Yeah, exactly. You're intentionally shifting your focus away from that hurt or the anger. and you're moving towards a perspective that's more compassionate and understanding.
Okay, I like that. Now, what about affirmations? Those seem to be a big part of A Course in Miracles as well. How can affirmations help us with forgiveness?
Oh, affirmations are so powerful. They're like tools that can actually rewire our thinking. So, by consciously choosing to say these phrases that affirm forgiveness and self acceptance, we can gradually shift our default way of thinking from judgment to compassion.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of affirmations that could help with that?
Sure, even something as simple as I release the need to judge myself and others, or I choose to see myself and everyone with compassion. These can be so transformative when you repeat them regularly.
Yeah, I can see that. Like consistently affirming those statements over time, it would start to, reprogram your thought patterns. It's like you're training your mind to choose forgiveness as like the natural response,
Mm.
rather than like defaulting to anger or resentment.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that idea of, forgiveness being our function. Like it's our core purpose. It's not just about feeling better or making peace with others. It's about aligning ourselves with our true nature as, beings of light.
I'm really struck by that idea that forgiveness is a practice, not some destination you arrive at. It's something that we have to keep choosing each and every day.
Yeah. And with each act of forgiveness, no matter how small, we create this ripple effect of peace and understanding that spreads outward from ourselves. Like imagine dropping a pebble into a still pond. You see how those ripples spread out and they touch everything in their path?
That's a beautiful image. So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive into Lesson 62, I want to leave our listeners with a question. How can you apply this idea of forgiveness in your own life?
Think about someone you've been holding a grudge against, or maybe even yourself, and just ask yourself, what would it feel like to let go of that?
Yeah. And just remember that each act of forgiveness,
Mhm.
whether it's towards yourself or someone else, it's a step towards, a brighter, more peaceful world. And it all starts with you. We'll be back soon to explore even more practical ways to bring this powerful practice of forgiveness into our daily lives. Welcome back to our deep dive into Lesson 62 of A Course in Miracles. We've been talking about forgiveness as a practice and like how it can be a real game changer, not just in our relationships with other people, but also in our, relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. And as we're wrapping up this lesson, I think it's important to remember that the Course in Miracles doesn't just throw all these big ideas at us without giving us some guidance on how to actually live them out?
Yeah, for sure. We've talked about like daily reflection and affirmations as practical tools for forgiveness. But are there other ways that we can weave this practice into our lives?
Absolutely. One thing the Course talks about is the power of just choosing to see the good in others, even when it's tough? So instead of focusing on their flaws or like the ways they might have hurt us, we can try to look for those positive qualities, their strengths, their inherent goodness.
That reminds me of something we talked about earlier, that whole idea about forgiveness being about recognizing the light, both within ourselves and in other people. Like we're choosing to focus on that light instead of getting stuck in the shadows.
Exactly. And when we practice seeing the light in others, it can have this ripple effect. It can soften our hearts, help us judge less, and it can even inspire others to act more in line with their own inner goodness.
Wow. So it's like we can actually impact the energy around us just by choosing to see the best in people. I mean, it's not about being naive
Mm-hmm.
or ignoring harmful actions or anything like that. It's more about shifting our perspective to one that fosters understanding and compassion.
Exactly. And remember, this whole practice of choosing forgiveness and seeing that light in ourselves and others, it's not something we're going to perfect overnight or anything. It's a journey. It's an
Yeah.
ongoing process of learning and growing.
Right. I think that's a really important point because there are going to be times when we stumble, when we get caught up in those old patterns of, you know, resentment or judgment. But that's okay. The key is to just keep coming back to the practice, keep choosing forgiveness, even when it feels really difficult.
You got it. And with every act of forgiveness, we're not only changing our own lives, but we're also contributing to a more peaceful and loving world.
This has been a really illuminating deep dive into Lesson 62.
Hmm.
It's a good reminder that forgiveness isn't about, you know, letting someone off the hook. It's more about freeing ourselves from that burden of anger and resentment and judgment. It's about choosing to see the world and ourselves with more compassion and understanding.
And it all starts with just one choice, a willingness to open our hearts and embrace that transformative power of forgiveness.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration. And we hope you'll join us again for our next deep dive into A Course in Miracles. Until then, may you find peace and healing through the transformative power of forgiveness.